Hi, this is Roche and my presentation on Redwood Forest National Park. Life before Redwood National Park. For many years, varying indigenous tribes were living on the coast of California where Redwood National Park is located. This land was used in a sacred way, living a fully nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle where the people relied on the land and took nothing more than what they needed. The natives believed in living in conjunction with the land rather than abusing the natural resources provided. But in the 1850s, along with the California Gold Rush, redwoods became highly sought after for logging purposes. Indigenous peoples removal. The increased colonial traffic caused the displacement of these tribes, so much so that only a small portion of these tribes remain today on the outskirts of the park and speak their traditional languages, including Yurok, Hopa, Toloa, and Karuk. Over 500 acres of redwood forest land has been given back to native tribes, which might seem like a big number, but it's really not when compared to the total acreage of the park itself. Establishment. A group aiming at saving the redwoods called Save the Redwoods League partnered with the state of California to set aside over 100,000 acres from the year 1920 to 1960. California established a few state parks in the 1920s, including Humboldt Redwood State Park, which aimed at getting visitors to explore the redwood groves. But because logging continued outside of the state parks, there was a big push for preserving ecosystems from the Sierra Club and National Geographic Society in order to get Congress involved and to create a national park, including the state parks of the Redwood Creek area. Declaration. Congress had pushback from timber companies, but a compromise was finally reached on October 2, 1968, when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the act so that Redwood National Park could be established. However, logging continued into 1977 when the park took on an expansion project with the help of President Jimmy Carter, which then added 48,000 more acres to the protected area. In 1994, NPS and CDPR agreed to jointly manage Redwood National and state parks. Major stakeholders. Mainly commercial logging companies and conservationists were involved in the evolution of Redwood National Park. Both parties would become involved with Congress to try and persuade one way or another and gain support for their beliefs. Groups mentioned previously, such as Save the Redwoods League, NPS, and CDPR, all were involved in the establishment for the park. Issues with contesting. In the 1960s, an unprecedented challenge came about. The land that would become the park was privately owned, meaning that the government would end up paying hundreds of millions of dollars, which is more money seen paid at this point in any time than any other piece of land. Indigenous peoples did not push back because they were forcibly removed from their land before establishing a park had even become an idea. Instead, most of the contesting came from private landowners and logging companies in order to build buildings. So why the redwoods? Redwoods can clean more carbon from the air and store it longer than any other tree. It plays an important role in the water cycle, helping to capture water from rain, which trickles down to streams, which their roots will help to trap sediment and improve water quality. Redwoods provide habitats for many endangered species that can't be found anywhere else on Earth, like the Humboldt martin and northern spotted owl, which you can see pictured to the right. The IUCN category, the Redwood National Park is Protected Area Category 2 because it is a national park which is managed for ecosystem protection and recreation. Logging is still a threat occurring. Trees are often cleared and then the land is converted for different usages. Of the original redwood range, about a quarter has been lost to land conversion. Burl poaching, where pieces of trees are removed with chainsaws to be used as furniture, is also a direct threat. This causes scarring and threats to endangered species due to loss of habitat. And finally, park pollution, such as leaving trash and human waste, leftover food, and litter in undesignated areas, will lead to the degradation of the ecosystem. Main threat. Fire is natural and necessary for proper growth in the Redwood National Park by preventing overcrowding of trees and stimulating the germination of seedlings. Fire is a major threat to many forests, but especially the Redwood National Park because of the common droughts in the state of California, to the point that it seems every year there are records broken for wildfires in this area. A lightning strike caused a major wildfire in 2020, which has closed Redwood National's sister park, Big Basin Redwood State Park, indefinitely. Indirect threat. The indirect threat happening outside of the Redwood National Park are droughts due to climate change, which is a common threat, especially in the California area of the national park, which is known for having frequent droughts. Note that these droughts are not occurring inside the national park, but rather on the outskirts of the park, because the typical climate in the park itself is cool and damp, which are not prime conditions for wildfires. Underlying threat. The underlying threat is human population growth globally, leading to a growth in consumption rates. Increased consumption rates translates to more fossil fuels being burned to make more products for the ever-growing demands due to the increase in population. Causal chain. The underlying threat is caused by human population growth globally, leading to a growth in consumption rates. This translates to the indirect threat happening outside of the Redwood National Park, where climate change-induced droughts are occurring due to the warming of our planet caused by an increase in population. The indirect nearby droughts lead to the direct threat happening inside of the protected area, where wildfires are an issue amongst redwood trees triggered by droughts. History of fire threat. Before the land was taken from indigenous peoples, prescribed burns were a typical practice in the redwood forest. This would help to replenish the soil by recycling nutrients in a healthy and controlled way. This practice took place for thousands of years until the area became a national park where fires were looked down upon. Factors such as Smokey the Bear, being the face of an extremely successful "Fire is Bad" campaign, conditioned the public to see fires as something negative and not a necessity to keep forests healthy. Planning tools, risk and incident management systems. There is a fire management plan in place. Actions of the FMP include increasing the total acres of prescribed fire from 4,400 acres to 6,800 acres with new prescribed fire units in the Crescent and Enderts Beach areas. This is an example of precautionary anticipation of threats that Redwood National Forest Management has in place in case of fire and for future planned prescribed fires. First management principle, threats to PAs are inevitable. Anticipate with pre-planned responses, train personnel and logistic support. Threats will only increase over time, so be prepared, especially in response to the changing population and resource usage patterns. The Redwood National Forest is doing this by putting an FMP in and making sure that there are highly educated supporters such as the California Incident Management Team. Second management principle, effective environmental planning processes are necessary to combat threats. The Redwood National Park has put out many resources for the public to use to increase their safety to combat the threat of wildfires. Third management principle, effective community communication may help to reduce threats. Save the Redwoods program has a K-12 education program. Since the 1970s, Wolf Creek Education Center has provided students with educational opportunities. Their management has been extremely successful in preventing destructive wildfires by using prescribed fires. Here is my park management plan reference, and I just wanted to know any pictures that do not have a citation have been sourced from stock photos via the program that I have used to create this video. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.